Good evening, and welcome to Dark Historian. You're in a quiet place now, made for slow stories, soft thoughts, and peaceful sleep. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let the day gently fade away. Tonight, we'll explore the quieter side of history, simple lives, strange old customs, and forgotten moments that shaped the world in quiet ways. If this calm journey brings you peace or helps you rest, feel free to like or subscribe, only if it feels. Right now, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Unseen Burden. A night's life beyond the tawny grounds. Good evening, friends. As the world outside perhaps hums with its usual energy, or perhaps has already settled into a quiet slumber, let us together dim the lights. Settle yourselves under a warm, comforting blanket, letting your body soften into the embrace of your chosen resting place. Allow your breath to deepen, to lengthen, to become a gentle rhythm that guides you. If this slow, unhurried journey through forgotten moments of time brings you peace, a quiet calm that invites rest, then perhaps, if it feels right, a gentle tap on the like button, a soft click to subscribe, might be a fitting gesture. No rush, no obligation, just a quiet acknowledgement. If it feels aligned with the stillness we are cultivating here, tonight, we embark upon a very specific journey, one that seeks to unravel the often romanticized tapestry of the medieval knight, to peel back the layers of shining armor and heroic ballads, revealing instead a life that was, in many ways, an unending series of discomforts, obligations, and the quiet, persistent grind of survival. We imagine the knight, often as a figure of grandeur astride a magnificent steed, lance couched, banner fluttering in the wind. But let us consider, for a moment, the weight of the armor itself, not just physically, but metaphorically. It was a burden, a constraint, a constant reminder of a role that demanded far more than mere bravery in battle. Picture, if you will, the young squire, perhaps no older than 7 or 8 years, torn from the familiar warmth of his family home, sent to the castle of a lord or a higher-ranking knight. His days, from dawn till deep into the night, were not filled with dreams of glory, but with the mundane. He would wake before the sun, his small hands already chafed from the rough wool of his tunic, his muscles aching from the previous day's drills. The air in the castle would be damp, cool, carrying the faint, earthy scent of straw and the distant, ever-present aroma of hearth smoke. His first task might be to rouse his master, to fetch water for washing, often cold, perhaps even icy. From the castle well, imagine the sting of that water on sleepy skin in the dim light of a medieval morning. His education was not primarily of books, though some basic literacy might be grudgingly taught. No, his education was of the body, of obedience, of service. He would learn to polish armor until it gleamed, a task both meticulous and endlessly repetitive. Each rivet, each plate, each strap required attention. He would tend to the horses, mucking out stalls, currying their coats, leading them to water. The sheer physicality of these tasks, day in and day out, built a quiet, enduring strength in his young frame, a strength born not of heroic feats, but of persistent, unglamorous labor. He would carry messages, run errands, fetch and carry, his young legs tireless, his presence a constant, almost invisible, shadow behind his master. Then came the training for combat, not the grand jousts of legend, but the brutal, repetitive practice with heavy wooden swords, blunt lances, and the exhausting practice of wielding a shield. The thud of wood on wood, the grunt of effort, the sting of bruised limbs, these were the lullabies of his youth. He would learn to fall too, roll, to rise again, to endure the discomfort of heavy male chafe against his skin, to breathe deeply even when his lungs burned. There was no comfortable padding, no cushioned mats. The ground was hard, often muddy, unforgiving. The training was designed to forge resilience, not just skill, but an almost unconscious ability to tolerate discomfort, a trait essential for the life that awaited him. Consider the simple act of putting on armor. It was not the swift, dramatic affair we see in films. For a full suit of plate armor, it was a process that could take a skilled squire well over half an hour, perhaps even an hour, depending on the complexity of the suit and the urgency of the moment. Each piece had to be correctly oriented, buckled, and strapped. The weight, distributed over the body, was still immense. A full suit of plate armor could easily weigh 50 to 60 pounds, perhaps more. This was not the weight of a modern backpack, but a rigid, encapsulating shell that restricted movement, muffled sound, and trapped heat. Imagine the stifling warmth within that metallic shell on a sunny day, or the bone-chilling cold it conducted. In the depths of winter and beyond the armor, think of the clothing beneath. Not the fine silks and linens often depicted, but rough woolen tunics, perhaps an undershirt of coarse linen. Designed for durability more than comfort, they would chafe, especially under the constant friction of movement against the armor. Hygiene, as we understand it, was a luxury rarely afforded. The sweat, the dirt, the grime would accumulate, leading to itching, rashes, and the pervasive, subtle stench that would cling to a knight's person despite his best efforts. The very fabric of his daily existence was woven with threads of minor irritation and pervasive discomfort. This was not a life of pampered luxury, but a rigorous, almost Spartan existence, demanding constant vigilance and physical endurance. The knight was, in essence, a walking, breathing, fighting machine, but a machine built of flesh and blood, subject to all the mundane vulnerabilities of the human body. He was not just a warrior, but a manager of his own enduring discomfort, a silent testament to the daily demands of a life built on the foundations of medieval hardship. Let us now gently pull back the curtain on another aspect of the knight's often overlooked existence, the incessant, inescapable demands of military service that stretched far beyond the dramatic clash of swords on a battlefield, while the tournament ground or the grand siege might capture the imagination. The reality of a knight's martial life was often a monotonous cycle of guard duty, punitive expeditions, and the sheer drudgery of maintaining order in a world perpetually teetering on the edge of local conflict. Imagine the chill of the night air seeping through the gaps in his mailed gauntlets as a knight stands sentinel atop a castle wall. The wind, a constant low moan, carries the scent of damp stone and the distant, unseen rustle of the forest. Hours would stretch into an eternity, his gaze fixed on the inky blackness beyond the flickering torchlight, straining to discern any movement, any flicker that might signify danger. This was not the thrilling charge of battle, but a test of endurance, of stillness, of the mind's capacity to remain alert amidst profound boredom. The knight was, first and foremost, a landlord, a manager of his domain, granted to him in exchange for military service to his lord. This meant he was responsible for the well-being and, crucially, the loyalty of the peasants who toiled on his lands. He was judge, jury, and often the executioner, mediating disputes over livestock, land boundaries, or petty thefts. Imagine the endless parade of villagers, each with their grievances, their pleas, their small, desperate hopes. He had to listen, to weigh, to decide, all while contending with his own biases, his own limited understanding of the intricate web of rural life. These were not the glorious matters of honor and chivalry, but the mundane, often irritating, demands of local governance, requiring patience, a thick skin, and a rudimentary understanding of the unwritten laws of the land. Consider the equipment. Beyond his armor, a knight was responsible for his weaponry, his horse, and the various tools of his trade. Swords needed constant sharpening, their edges prone to dulling with every impact. Shields, often made of wood and leather, needed repair. After even minor skirmishes, their painted designs flaking, their strapping coming loose. His warhorse, a massive, powerful beast, was perhaps his most valuable asset, requiring meticulous care. Imagine the hours spent currying the horse's coat, cleaning its hooves, checking its tack for wear and tear. These animals were not mere conveyances, they were partners in battle, and their well-being was directly tied to the knight's survival. The stable, often cold and damp, would be his second home, filled with the comforting sense of hay, horse, and leather. The creak of the saddle, the jingle of bit and bridle, these were the constant, familiar sounds of his working life. And then there was the perpetual state of readiness. The expectation that at any moment a summons might arrive, demanding his presence on a campaign, a punitive raid against a rebellious vassal, or a long, arduous march to defend a distant border. This meant a life lived with a quiet underlying tension, a gentle hum of anticipation that never quite faded, packing provisions, checking weapons, ensuring his retinue was prepared. These were not infrequent occurrences, but part of the recurring rhythm of his existence. Travel itself was an arduous affair. Roads were often little more than muddy tracks, overgrown paths, or ancient Roman ruins. Journeys were slow, exposed to the elements, and frequently uncomfortable. Imagine the endless hours on horseback, the jarring gait, the biting wind or relentless sun on his face, the dust coating his clothes and hair, the limited, often unappetizing food consumed by the roadside. Even within the castle walls, life was far from the opulent ideal. Castles were cold, drafty places, their massive stone walls absorbing and radiating the chill of the outside world. Heating was provided by fireplaces, which, while offering some warmth, filled the halls with smoke, stinging the eyes and leaving a lingering smell. Privacy was a rare commodity. Knights, even high-ranking ones, often shared sleeping quarters with their squires and servants, the rustling of straw mattresses and the quiet murmurs of sleep filling the communal space. The sounds of the castle were constant, the clang of the blacksmith, the distant shouts from the training yard, the chatter of servants, the barking of dogs. True solitude, a quiet moment for reflection, was an almost impossible luxury in this bustling, interconnected world. His days, then, were a blend of physical exertion, administrative duties, and the quiet vigilance that came with his station. He was a cog in a larger feudal machine, bound by oaths of fealty and the pragmatic realities of survival in a harsh, often unforgiving landscape. The shining armor and the noble steed were merely the outward symbols of a life that was, in essence, a relentless cycle of duty, discomfort, and the ever-present awareness of his precarious position in the intricate, often brutal, hierarchy of the medieval world. The heroism was often found not in dramatic charges, but in the quiet endurance of the daily grind, the persistent fulfillment of obligations that allowed the broader tapestry of society to hold together. One might wonder, as the flickering fire casts long shadows on the stone walls, if the weight of his duties felt heavier than the armor itself. Let us now shift our gaze to the quieter, more intimate struggles of the medieval knight. Those battles fought not with sword and shield, but within the confines of his own body and mind, against the unseen adversaries of disease, injury, and the pervasive anxieties of a life lived always on the edge. The romantic ideal often glosses over the brutal realities of medieval medicine, or rather, the stark absence of it. A simple cut, easily treatable today with antiseptic and a bandage, could, for a night, swiftly escalate into a infection. Imagine the searing pain of a wound, perhaps from a splintered lance or the jagged edge of a sword, and the growing dread as the flesh around it reddened, swelled, and began to seep with pus. The understanding of hygiene, of germ theory, was centuries away. Wounds were often dressed with whatever was at hand: cobwebs, herbs, perhaps a poultice of bread and mold, often introducing more harmful bacteria than they repelled. The stench of infection, a sickly, sweet and putrid odor, would fill the air around the afflicted knight, a constant reminder of the body's fragility. Many a valiant warrior who had faced down hordes of enemies succumbed not to the blade of an adversary, but to a raging fever that left him delirious and ultimately lifeless. Beyond the dramatic injuries of battle, consider the chronic ailments that would plague a knight's life. The constant wear and tear of heavy armor, the jarring impact of riding for hours, the strenuous physical demands of training and combat, these would take a significant toll on his joints. Arthritis, a relentless ache in the knees, hips, and shoulders would likely become a constant companion, especially as he aged. Imagine rising from a straw mattress in the cold, damp morning, every movement a protest from stiff, protesting limbs. His diet, while perhaps more varied than that of a peasant, was still far from balanced. Meat, bread, and ale formed the staple. Fresh fruits and vegetables, especially in winter, were scarce. This lack of dietary variety would lead to its own set of problems. Scurvy, though perhaps not identified by name, would manifest as bleeding gums and general malaise. Digestive issues would be common, exacerbated by heavy, often poorly prepared food. The subtle, persistent gnawing of hunger, even in times of plenty, could be a backdrop to his days if supply lines were disrupted or a siege lingered. Sleep, that most fundamental of human needs, was also often a precarious luxury. Castles, as we've explored, were rarely quiet. The sounds of the household, the watchful guards, the restless horses, even the scurrying of rats in the walls would contribute to a fragmented night. And then there was the ever-present anxiety. The knight carried the weight of his lords. Trust, the safety of his lands, the well-being of his family, and the very real possibility of a violent death. Imagine lying in the dimness, the flickering shadows dancing on the rough stone walls, his mind replaying a skirmish, strategizing for a potential attack, or simply worrying about the harvest. True, deep, restorative sleep, free from such burdens, would likely be a rare and cherished gift. Even the pursuit of chivalry, so often glorified, had its shadowed side. The code of chivalry, while promoting ideals of honor and courtesy, also demanded an almost suicidal bravery. To shrink from a challenge, to show fear, was to invite dishonor, a fate often considered worse than death. This societal pressure to always be courageous, to always embody the idealized warrior, would have been an immense psychological burden. The quiet fear, the moments of doubt, the yearning for peace would have to be suppressed, hidden beneath a stoic exterior. The very qualities that made him a respected knight also constrained his emotional landscape, denying him the space to simply be human, vulnerable, and afraid. So, when we envision the medieval knight, let us not merely see the gleaming armor and the heroic posture. Let us also see the persistent aches in his joints, the quiet dread of infection, the gnawing anxiety that prevented a full night's sleep, and the heavy mantle of expectation that he bore with every waking breath. His life, in essence, was a constant negotiation with discomfort, a relentless test of endurance, and a profound exercise in resilience, often for causes far grander and more abstract than his own personal well-being. It was a life of quiet sacrifice, its true heroism often found not in the thunder of battle, but in the mundane, persistent act of simply enduring. ETs now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 2, Beyond the Armor. A lady's lot in the age of chivalry. Good evening, quiet traveler. We've explored the clanking, demanding life of a knight, often romanticized, but in reality, quite gritty. Now, let's gently turn our attention to another figure of the medieval tapestry, one often seen through the soft, shimmering veil of courtly love and gentle domesticity. The medieval lady. Her life, like the knight's, was far from the idyllic image often painted. It was an existence defined by duty, by the harsh realities of her station, and by a constant negotiation of power within a world structured by men. Dim your lights a little further and let the quiet hum of history envelop you as we explore her rarely discussed daily routines. Imagine, if you will, the lady of a noble house, waking with the first sliver of dawn in a chamber that, despite its rich hangings and perhaps a carved chest, would still be chilled by the castle stones. There would be no private bathroom with running water. Instead, a servant would bring a basin of cold water, perhaps warmed slightly if the fire in the great hall had been lit early enough. Her ablutions would be simple, a quick splash and perhaps a rough linen towel. Her garments, while perhaps of finer wool or even silk, depending on her status, would still be cumbersome. Layers of chemise, kirtle, and overdress, often laced tightly, requiring assistance to Dan. The very act of dressing was a quiet, daily ritual of confinement, a physical embodiment of the societal expectations placed upon her. Her day, unlike the knight's, was not defined by the battlefield or the training yard, but by the intricate, often demanding, management of the household. The castle or manor house was a miniature economy, a self-sustaining world, and she was its chief administrator. Her morning might begin with a visit to the kitchens, a bustling, smoky space filled with the clang of pots, the chatter of cooks, and the aroma of roasting meats or bubbling stews. She would inspect the stores, the barrels of salted meat, the sacks of grain, the wheels of cheese, all meticulously accounted for. She would confer with the head cook, planning meals for perhaps dozens, if not hundreds, of people, her family, the knights, squires, servants, and any visiting dignitaries. This was not a passive role. It required sharp wits, an understanding of provisioning, and the ability to manage a diverse, often unruly staff. From the kitchen, her duties would extend to the storerooms and pantries. She oversaw the production of ale and wine, ensuring there was enough for the household's consumption. Imagine the scent of fermenting grains, the cool, damp air of the cellars where provisions were kept. She would supervise the baking of bread, the curing of meats, and the preserving of fruits and vegetables gathered from the gardens or forests. These were not simply domestic chores, they were vital acts of survival, ensuring the castle could withstand a siege or endure the harshness of winter. A miscalculation, a spoiled batch, could mean hunger and hardship for everyone under her roof. Beyond sustenance, the lady was responsible for the textile production. Wool, shorn from the castle's sheep, would need to be cleaned, carded, spun into yarn, dyed with natural pigments, and then woven into cloth. This was a continuous, laborious process, often undertaken by the female servants under her direct supervision. She would oversee the making and mending of clothing for the entire household, from the coarsest tunics for the laborers to the finer garments for her family. Imagine the soft scratch of unrefined wool on her fingers, the rhythmic hum of the spinning wheel, the subtle scent of lanolin. This quiet, persistent industry filled the dais, a constant testament to her role as the beating heart of the household's economy and comfort. Her hands, often described in ballads as delicate, would in reality be calloused from the demands of managing a medieval domestic machine. This was her battleground, her daily campaign fought with ledgers and looms rather than swords and shields. The success or failure of the entire domestic realm rested squarely upon her shoulders, a silent, unseen burden that rarely found its way into the heroic tales of the age. Let's delve deeper into the daily rhythms of the medieval lady's life, moving beyond the bustling hearth and into the quiet corners of education, social diplomacy, and the management of her children. Her responsibilities extended far beyond the tangible goods of the household. She was the custodian of family lineage, the educator of the young, and often a crucial link in the delicate chain of feudal alliances. Imagine her, perhaps in the quieter hours of the afternoon, seated by a window, the light filtering through thin panes of horn or oiled linen, illuminating the intricate needlework in her hands. This wasn't merely a pastime. Sewing, embroidery, and weaving were essential skills for creating and mending the household's textiles, from clothing to tapestries that insulated cold stone walls. The meticulous precision required for such tasks fostered patience and attention to detail, qualities vital for her multifaceted role. Her own education, while different from a knight's, was no less rigorous. While few noblewomen were highly literate, in the modern sense, many were taught to read and write in their vernacular language, and some even in Latin, particularly if they were destined for a convent or had access to a chaplain. Her learning often encompassed arithmetic, necessary for managing household accounts, and herb lore, understanding the properties of plants for medicinal purposes to treat the common ailments of her family and servants. Picture her poring over a simple, perhaps illustrated, manuscript on remedies, her brow furrowed in concentration, trying to recall which concoction of dried herbs would soothe a fever or mend a broken bone. These weren't academic pursuits for leisure, but practical skills essential for the well-being of everyone under her care. Crucially, the lady was responsible for the upbringing of her children, both sons and daughters, until the boys were sent away as squires. She would instill in them not just basic literacy and religious instruction, but also the strict codes of conduct, etiquette, and the understanding of their place within the rigid social hierarchy. For her daughters, she was a direct mentor, teaching them all the skills she herself possessed, from managing servants to the intricacies of textile production. Imagine the quiet lessons, the patience required to teach a young girl to hold a needle correctly, or to understand the nuances of managing a sprawling, complex household. These were not abstract theories, but lessons learned through direct, hands-on experience, often alongside her own mother from a very young age. Beyond the immediate family, the lady was a central figure in social diplomacy. Marriages were strategic alliances, and it was often the lady who maintained correspondence with other noble families, particularly regarding potential matches for her children. Her letters, penned carefully with quill and ink, would convey not just personal greetings, but subtle political messages, strengthening bonds or subtly asserting influence. Imagine the careful crafting of words, the delicate dance of politeness and hidden agendas in a medieval missive, knowing that the wrong phrase could ignite a feud or jeopardize a crucial alliance. She would also play hostess to visiting dignitaries, ensuring their comfort, overseeing elaborate feasts, and engaging in conversation that could sway opinions or solidify allegiances. These were not mere social gatherings. They were vital acts of statecraft, conducted with grace and shrewd intelligence. The medieval lady's life, therefore, was a constant balancing act between the domestic and the diplomatic, the practical and the personal. She was a manager, an educator, a healer, and a silent diplomat, all while navigating the strictures of a society that afforded women limited official power, but demanded immense responsibility. Her life, though perhaps lacking the dramatic flair of a knight's battles, was a continuous testament to quiet strength, unwavering diligence, and an often unseen intellectual prowess, all essential for the stability and prosperity of the medieval world. One might softly wonder, as the day gently fades into twilight, about the burdens she carried that no shining armor could ever reveal. Let's now gently consider the more personal and often precarious aspects of a medieval lady's existence, focusing on the shadow of marriage, the fragility of life and childbirth, and her spiritual world. Her fate, from a tender age, was rarely her own to decide. Marriages were, almost without exception, strategic alliances, meticulously negotiated by fathers and powerful lords. Imagine the young girl, perhaps barely a teenager, being told she would be wed to a man she might never have, met from a distant land, solely to solidify a political bond or secure a much-needed alliance. Her feelings, her personal desires, were secondary, if they were considered at all. Her worth was often measured in her dowry, the lands or wealth she brought to the union, and her ability to produce heirs. Once married, her primary duty, often unspoken but profoundly understood, was to bear children, especially sons, to continue the family line and secure the inheritance. This was a duty fraught with immense danger. Childbirth in the medieval era was a perilous undertaking, a leading cause of death for women. There was little understanding of hygiene or medical intervention. Deliveries were often assisted by local midwives, whose knowledge was based on tradition and anecdotal experience rather than scientific understanding. Imagine the fear, the pain, and the sheer vulnerability a lady would experience during labor, knowing that each birth could very well be her last. The sounds of a medieval birthing chamber would be a stark contrast to the quiet of the rest of the castle, filled with whispers, prayers, and the inevitable cries of both mother and newborn. Many noble women endured multiple pregnancies, facing this life or death ordeal numerous times, each successful birth a testament to their physical resilience and fortune beyond the physical trials. Her life was shaped by a profound spiritual devotion. The church permeated every aspect of medieval existence, and for women, it offered a different kind of solace and sometimes a quiet form of power. A lady would likely spend a significant part of her day in prayer, attending mass in the castle, chapel, perhaps even sponsoring religious works or charitable endeavors. Imagine the quiet hush of the chapel, the scent of incense, the chanting of Latin hymns, providing a brief respite from the demanding realities of her daily life. For some women, particularly widows or those who chose a religious life, the convent offered an alternative path, a place where they could pursue learning, engage in administrative roles, and find a community of women free from the obligations of marriage and childbearing. This choice, while still limited by societal norms, offered a unique avenue for intellectual and spiritual fulfillment that was otherwise largely unavailable. Finally, consider the constant threat of widowhood. While it could bring a degree of independence, allowing a woman to manage her own lands and affairs, it also left her vulnerable. A widow with significant property was a tempting target for opportunistic lords, and she might find herself pressured, even forced, into another. Marriage. Her ability to navigate these political waters, to protect her children's inheritance and her own autonomy, required shrewdness and a deep understanding of feudal law. The quiet strength and resilience required to weather these storms were as much a part of her lot as the rich fabrics she wore or the feasts she oversaw. The medieval lady, then, was far more than a decorative figure in a knight's narrative. She was a foundational pillar of medieval society, constantly balancing domestic management with social diplomacy, enduring the dangers of childbirth, and navigating a world where her personal agency was often secondary to political and familial obligation. Her legacy, often unseen in grand historical accounts, lies in the quiet, persistent strength with which she managed her household, raised her children, and sustained the very fabric of medieval life. As the final whispers of her day fade into the soft glow of memory, we are left with the quiet dignity of a life lived with immense purpose and profound, often unacknowledged, bravery. Story 3. More mud than glory. The reality of medieval warfare. Good evening, quiet companion. We've journeyed through the personal discomforts of the knight and the formidable responsibilities of the medieval lady. Now, let's gently shift our focus to the very crucible that defined much of their world. Medieval warfare. Forget, for a moment, the grand Hollywood battles with their clean lines and heroic charges. The reality was often a far muddier, more disorganized, and infinitely more brutal affair, less about glory and more about grinding attrition, disease, and the sheer chaos of unorganized violence. Settle deeper into your comfort. Let the sounds around you soften, and allow your mind to drift into the clamor and confusion of a forgotten battlefield. Imagine, if you will, the gathering of an army. This wasn't a sleek, professional force. It was a chaotic assembly. Knights would arrive with their retinues, squires, men-at-arms, perhaps a handful of archers or crossbowmen. Foot soldiers, often peasants, levied from the local lords' lands, would join them, poorly equipped, perhaps carrying little more than a sharpened stake, a crude spear, or a farming tool repurposed for war. The sheer logistical nightmare of feeding, watering, and quartering such a diverse, unmotivated, and often undisciplined host was immense. There were no standardized uniforms, no organized supply lines as we understand them today. Each man brought what he could, and the army subsisted largely by foraging, a polite term for taking what was needed from the surrounding countryside, often to the profound misery of the local populace, even if they were nominally on the same side. The air would be thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and the nervous tension that always precedes large-scale movement of men. The march itself was an exhausting ordeal. Medieval roads, as we've touched upon, were not built for armies. They were often muddy tracks, river crossings, or treacherous forest paths. Wagons would frequently get bogged down, horses would go lame, and men, burdened by their equipment, would succumb to fatigue, illness, or simple despair. A knight, while mounted, still endured the relentless jarring of the saddle, the constant exposure to the elements, and the pervasive dust or mud that coated everything. Imagine days, weeks, even months of this monotonous movement, punctuated only by makeshift camps in open fields, exposed to rain, wind, and the chill of night. Sleep was fitful, disturbed by the sounds of the camp, the nervous whinny of horses, or the distant howl of wolves. There was no comfortable tent for every man. Many simply slept on the ground, wrapped in a cloak, and then the weapons. While the shining sword of a knight is iconic, the reality of its use was often brutal. Swords were heavy, designed for hacking and cleaving, not the graceful duels of fiction. They would chip, dull, and even break with repeated impact. Lances, used in the initial charge, were often splintered upon impact, turning into dangerous shards. The common foot soldier wielded less refined but equally deadly tools: axes designed for felling trees, hammers used by smiths, longbows that demanded immense strength and practice, or crossbows that were slow to reload but packed a powerful punch. Imagine the sheer physicality of wielding these weapons for extended periods. The muscle fatigue, the blisters on the hands, the splinters from wooden shafts. The armor, while offering protection, was also a significant burden. It was hot, heavy, and restrictive. Movement was cumbersome, every step a deliberate effort. Vision was limited by narrow eye slits and helmets, and sound was muffled, making communication difficult amidst the roar of battle. A fallen knight, even if uninjured, could find it incredibly difficult to rise unaided, his metallic shell pinning him to the ground. A vulnerable target for an enemy seeking to finish him off or capture him for ransom. This wasn't graceful. Combat, it was a brutal, exhausting struggle against both the enemy and the very equipment designed to protect you. The battlefield, before any blood was shed, was already a place of profound physical discomfort, a testament to the sheer logistical and human struggle of simply getting an army to where it needed to be. Now, let's step onto the battlefield itself, not as a glorious arena, but as a chaotic, terrifying, and profoundly disorienting place. The noise alone would have been overwhelming. Imagine the guttural shouts of men, the high-pitched screams of horses, the clang of steel on steel, the thud of blunt weapons on shields and armor, the whistle of arrows, and the dull, sickening thwack of impact on flesh. All of this would have been amplified by the enclosed space of a formation, making it difficult to hear commands or even distinguish friend from foe in the maelstrom. The air would quickly become thick with dust, kicked up by thousands of feet, and hooves, obscuring vision and clogging lungs. On a wet day, the ground would turn into a churned mire, making every step a struggle. Every fall a plunge into suffocating mud. Formations, though seemingly organized, were rarely maintained perfectly. In the heat of battle, a knight's charge, while powerful, could easily devolve into a scattered melee if the enemy held firm or if the terrain proved too difficult. Foot soldiers, often poorly trained and motivated, might break ranks at the first sign of trouble, turning a disciplined line into a panicked rout. The sheer lack of sophisticated communication meant that once a battle began, it largely ran its course with little central direction. Commanders might shout orders, but in the din and confusion, these rarely reached the entire line. It was a localized struggle, a series of individual duels and small skirmishes, often decided by brute force and sheer endurance rather than elegant strategy. Consider the physical toll of close combat. Swinging a heavy sword or axe for minutes on end is exhausting. The full weight of armor, while protective, adds to the fatigue. Every parry, every blow, every movement drains energy. Men would fight until their muscles screamed, until their lungs burned, until sheer exhaustion forced them to stumble. Injuries were horrific. Swords and axes could sever limbs, crush bones, or split skulls. Arrows, though often blunted by mail, could still pierce unprotected areas or lodge deep in muscle. Lances, in their initial impact, could impale, or, if broken, leave jagged splinters. There was no clean wound, no quick, merciful death for many. Instead, there was agonizing pain, bleeding, and the slow, creeping dread of infection setting in. And then there were the sieges, a prolonged form of warfare that often involved far more suffering than pitched battles. Sieges could last for months, even years. For the besiegers, it meant endless digging of trenches, constructing siege engines like trebuchets and battering rams, and enduring the constant threat of sorties from the besieged castle. Imagine the back-breaking labor, the exposure to disease in cramped, unsanitary camps, and the relentless boredom interspersed with moments of intense danger. For the besieged, trapped within the castle walls, it was a test of endurance against starvation, thirst, and disease. Food supplies would dwindle, water sources might be contaminated or cut off, and the close quarters would allow illnesses to spread like wildfire. The stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, and decaying food would fill the air. Hope would slowly erode, replaced by desperation as the days stretched into weeks, and the last remnants of food were rationed out. The reality of medieval warfare was a far cry from the chivalrous duels of legend. It was a messy, brutal, and often protracted affair, where disease and logistical failures often claimed more lives than the clash of arms. The glory was rare, the suffering pervasive, and the lasting impact on both the landscape and the human. Spirit was profound. One might quietly reflect on the silent stories of endurance, fear, and sheer will to survive that permeated these forgotten fields of conflict. Let's now softly turn our attention to the aftermath of medieval warfare. A landscape scarred not only by physical destruction, but by the quiet, lingering trauma on the human spirit. The notion of a quick, decisive victory, followed by a triumphant return, was often a distant dream. The grim reality involved the disposition of the dead and wounded, a task as unglamorous as it was essential. Imagine the chaotic scene after a battle, the groans of the injured mingling with the silence of the fallen. There were no organized field hospitals, no rapid evacuation of casualties. Wounded men would lie where they fell, often for hours, sometimes days, exposed to the elements, their injuries festering. Those lucky enough to be found by their comrades might receive rudimentary care from a camp surgeon, whose tools were often limited to crude knives, saws, and hot irons for cauterization. Amputation, often performed without anesthetic beyond. Perhaps a strong drink or a blow to the head was a common outcome for severe limb injuries. The screams of those undergoing such procedures would echo through the makeshift medical tents, a chilling counterpoint to the earlier battle din. For the dead, the process was equally stark. There were no mass graves dug by machines, no respectful individual burials for every fallen soldier. Bodies would often be stripped of anything valuable: armor, weapons, clothing, leaving them vulnerable to scavengers, both human and animal. Mass graves were common, simple pits where bodies were unceremoniously dumped and covered. The stench of death would linger on the battlefield for days, sometimes weeks, a haunting reminder of the violence that had transpired. For a night, if he was fortunate enough to be identified, his body might be returned to his family or buried on consecrated ground, but this was a privilege, not a guarantee. Many simply vanished, absorbed into the anonymous earth of a foreign field. Beyond the immediate grim aftermath, the long-term consequences of warfare cast a heavy shadow. For the survivors, disease was an ever-present threat in the cramped, unsanitary conditions of medieval camps. Dysentery, typhoid, and various fevers could sweep through an army, decimating its ranks more effectively than any enemy blade. A knight might return from campaign not with battle scars, but with a debilitating illness that would plague him for months or even years. The psychological toll, though not understood in modern terms, was also profound. Witnessing such brutality, enduring constant fear and hardship, and perhaps performing acts of violence oneself, would leave an indelible mark. While there was no formal therapy, the return to the familiar rhythms of home, the solace of family and faith, might offer some quiet balm to a troubled spirit. And finally, consider the economic devastation left in the wake of an army. Fields trampled, villages burned, livestock stolen. The very fabric of rural life was often destroyed. Peasants, who had little say in the conflicts waged by their lords, bore the brunt of this destruction, losing their homes, their livelihoods, and sometimes their lives. For the knight, his lands might also suffer, reducing his income and forcing him to rebuild. Warfare, therefore, was not merely a clash of arms, but a force that reshaped entire landscapes, disrupted communities, and left a legacy of hardship that could stretch for generations. The true cost of medieval warfare, then, extended far beyond the battlefield. It encompassed the agonizing pain of untreated wounds, the pervasive stench of death, the slow erosion of health through disease, and the long, quiet process of rebuilding shattered lives and landscapes. The tales of glory often obscure the persistent mud, the pervasive fear, and the enduring human cost that truly characterized this brutal aspect of the medieval world. One might softly wonder about the silent prayers whispered by those who simply wished for the distant echo of battle to finally fade away. Story 4. The Gastric Gauntlet. Dining and Disease in the Knightly Castle. Good evening, gentle listener. We've explored the burdens of the knight, the duties of the lady, and the muddy realities of medieval warfare. Now, let's tiptoe into a more intimate, yet equally revealing, aspect of medieval life: food and drink, and the surprisingly perilous journey it took from field to table within the walls of a knightly castle. Forget the lavish banquets of Hollywood, overflowing with perfectly roasted meats and gleaming platters. The reality was a constant struggle against spoilage, contamination, and a pervasive lack of nutritional understanding, making every meal a potential gamble, and every digestive ailment a familiar companion. Dim your lights further, perhaps imagine the faint scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, and let us drift into the silent, often precarious, world of medieval provisions. Imagine the castle kitchens, not the sterile, efficient spaces we know today, but vast, often smoky rooms built for practicality rather than fires would roar in enormous hearths, cooking spits constantly turning. The floor might be stone, often uneven, and difficult to keep truly clean. Animals, like dogs and cats, would often roam freely, sometimes even chickens, attracted by scraps. There was little understanding of cross-contamination. Raw meat might sit next to cooked dishes, and hands, frequently unwashed, would move between various tasks. The air would be thick with the aroma of roasting game, simmering pottage, and the faint, underlying scent of damp stone and a lack of proper ventilation. Storage was a perpetual challenge. Without refrigeration, food spoilage was a constant enemy. Meat would be salted, smoked, or dried to preserve it, often leading to a texture that was incredibly tough and intensely salty. Imagine chewing on a piece of beef so heavily preserved that it required hours of soaking and cooking just to become palatable. Fish, especially important on fast days, would also be salted or dried. Grain, the staple of bread, had to be protected from rats, mice, and insects, often stored in large bins in dry, cool cellars. Vegetables and fruits were largely seasonal and perishable, meaning a diet could be incredibly monotonous during the long winter months, relying almost entirely on preserved goods. Imagine the anticipation for the first fresh greens or berries of spring after months of salted meat and hard bread. Water was another significant concern. While castles often had wells, the purity of the water was always questionable. Wells could become contaminated by runoff, animal waste, or even decaying matter. For this reason, ale and weak wine were the primary beverages for almost everyone, from the lord to the lowest peasant. The fermentation process killed many of the harmful bacteria found in water, making these alcoholic drinks a safer option. Imagine beginning your day not with a glass of water, but with a weak, often cloudy ale. Children, too, would drink diluted versions of these beverages. The consistent consumption of ale, while safer, also meant a subtle, constant level of alcohol in the bloodstream for many, affecting alertness and mood in ways we can only speculate about. The preparation of food was labor-intensive, and often crude root vegetables would be scrubbed, perhaps, but not always peeled, leading to the consumption of dirt and grit. Meats would be roasted over open fires, often singed on the outside and undercooked within. Spices, though highly valued, were expensive and used sparingly, primarily by the elite to mask the taste of slightly spoiled food or to add variety to an otherwise bland diet. Imagine the simple, unrefined flavors, dominated by salt and the smokiness of the hearth. For the common folk, and even for knights when on campaign or in leaner times, the staple was often pottage, a thick stew of whatever grains and vegetables were available, perhaps with a small piece of meat if fortunate. This was a communal dish, eaten from a common pot with wooden spoons or even bare hands, offering little in the way of variety or culinary sophistication. Every meal was a direct result of laborious preservation, careful management of scarce resources, and a constant battle against the invisible forces of decay and disease. The very act of eating, while nourishing, was also a subtle exposure to the unseen perils of medieval life. Let's now consider the subtle, yet pervasive, dangers that lurked within every mouthful of medieval food, turning dining into a quiet dance with potential illness. The lack of understanding about microbes and sanitation meant that foodborne illnesses were incredibly common, often indistinguishable from other ailments. Imagine the familiar gnawing of a stomachache, the sudden onset of nausea, or the debilitating weakness of dysentery symptoms that were a routine part of life. In a medieval castle, these were not seen as the result of tainted food, but perhaps as a bad humor, a punishment from God, or simply an unfortunate turn of events. The preparation methods themselves, while intended to preserve food, often introduced new risks. Smoking. Meat involved exposing it to smoke for long periods, which could introduce carcinogens. Heavy salting, while effective against spoilage, meant a diet incredibly high in sodium, contributing to issues like kidney stones and dehydration. Imagine the constant thirst, unquenched by the weekly brewed ale, driving individuals to drink more of a potentially unsafe liquid. The reliance on unpasteurized dairy products also meant a higher risk of diseases like brucellosis or Malta fever, which could cause prolonged fevers, joint pain, and chronic fatigue. Beyond the processing, the lack of variety in the medieval diet, particularly for the common folk and during lean seasons, led to widespread nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a common affliction, leading to bleeding gums, general weakness, and internal hemorrhaging. Imagine the subtle, persistent ache in the joints, the lingering fatigue, or the quiet discomfort of aching teeth, often attributed to aging or a weak constitution rather than a dietary imbalance. Anemia, resulting from iron deficiency, would contribute to a pallid complexion and a constant sense of lethargy, making even simple tasks feel monumental. The idea of a balanced diet, with its focus on diverse, fresh produce, was a concept centuries away from medieval understanding. Then there was the ever-present threat of pests. Rats and mice were ubiquitous in medieval castles, drawn by the ready availability of food stores. They would contaminate grain, gnaw through provisions, and, crucially, spread diseases like the bubonic plague, though its connection to rodents was unknown at the time. Fleas, lice, and other parasites were also common, vectors for various illnesses, making personal comfort a rare luxury. Imagine the persistent itching, the constant battle against unseen tiny invaders, and the quiet resignation to their presence as an inescapable part of life. Even the very act of eating together, while a social necessity, presented its own dangers. Food was often served on trenchers, thick slices of stale bread that absorbed the juices from the meat and stew, and were then given to the poor or animals. These could be reused, but the constant sharing of communal dishes, the use of fingers, and the lack of proper washing facilities meant that germs spread rapidly. Imagine the subtle discomfort of sharing a common bowl, knowing that any illness within the household could easily be passed around the table. The daily meal, therefore, was a constant gamble with hygiene and health, a testament to the resilience of the medieval body in the face of persistent, unseen threats. Let's gently conclude our exploration of medieval dining by examining the consequences of these dietary challenges and the surprisingly sophisticated, yet ultimately limited, efforts to address them. The relentless assault of foodborne illnesses and nutritional deficiencies meant that chronic ailments were a constant companion for many in the castle. Digestive issues, from simple indigestion to debilitating dysentery, were endemic. Imagine the persistent cramps, the weakness, the constant trips to the latrine, a familiar, if unpleasant, part of daily life. For those suffering from scurvy, the slow decay of the body, the bleeding gums, and the profound fatigue would make every task an uphill battle. The average lifespan, even for the nobility, was significantly shorter than today, and childhood mortality rates were tragically high, often exacerbated by a lack of proper nutrition during crucial developmental years. Despite the pervasive health challenges, there was a rudimentary, though often misguided, understanding of the link between food and well-being. Medieval medical texts, influenced by ancient Greek and Roman ideas, often focused on the concept of humours, the belief that the body was composed of four primary fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Health was believed to depend on the balance of these humours, and food was thought to have specific properties that could affect this balance. Imagine a physician, or perhaps the lady of the house, recommending certain foods to cool an overheated humour or warm a chilled one. For instance, cold, damp foods like cucumbers might be avoided in winter, while hot, dry spices might be favoured. This belief system, while lacking scientific basis, at least prompted some consideration of diet, fasting, and feast days. Dictated by the church, also played a significant role in the rhythm of medieval dining. Fasting, particularly during Lent and on Fridays, meant abstaining from meat, dairy, and eggs. This forced a reliance on fish, vegetables, and grains, ironically providing a temporary, albeit unintentional, dietary shift that might alleviate some of the common deficiencies. Feast days, on the other hand, were opportunities for lavish consumption, often involving an excess of rich meats and ale. While these were moments of celebration, they could also lead to bouts of indigestion and exacerbate existing health issues, especially after periods of scarcity. Imagine the subtle gluttony after a long fast, followed by the inevitable discomfort. Ultimately, dining in a medieval castle was a blend of necessity, ritual, and constant risk. It highlighted the ingenuity required to preserve food in a world without modern technology, the subtle dangers posed by a lack of sanitation, and the pervasive impact of an unbalanced diet on daily health. The medieval plate, far from being a mere vessel for sustenance, was a testament to the daily struggle for survival and the quiet resilience of those who lived in a time when every meal was a journey through the gastric gauntlet. One might softly wonder, as the echoes of forgotten banquets fade, about the simple pleasure of a truly fresh, wholesome meal that was so often out of reach. Story 5. The Silent Scribes, Monastic Life, and the Preservation of Knowledge. Good evening, quiet seeker. We have explored the discomforts of the knight and the lady, and even the perils of medieval dining. Now, let us drift into a different kind of medieval world, one of quiet contemplation, meticulous labor, and profound dedication. The monastery, far from the clamor of castles and battlefields. These secluded havens were the unsung preservers of knowledge, the silent workshops where the very threads of learning were spun and saved from the ravages of time and conflict. Dim your lights a little more, settle into your comfortable space, and let us imagine the gentle rustle of parchment and the rhythmic scratching of a quill in a quiet scriptorium.imagine. If you will, waking before dawn as a medieval monk, not to the trumpet blast of a castle or the demanding cries of children, but to the soft, resonant peal of a bell. The air in your small, unheated cell or cellar would be profoundly cold, especially in winter. The stone walls radiating a deep chill. Your bed would be a simple pallet, perhaps a thin straw mattress on a wooden frame, or even just a mat on the floor. There would be no window, only a narrow slit in the wall, letting in the faintest hint of the approaching light. Your coarse woolen habit would be your constant companion, its rough texture a subtle reminder of the vows of poverty and austerity. Your first duty of the day would be to join your brethren for Mattins, the earliest prayer service, often held in the deepest hours of the night, perhaps around 2 or 3 a.m. Picture walking through the cold, echoing cloisters. The only sounds, the soft shuffling of sandaled feet and the whispered prayers of your companions. The abbey church, while perhaps grand, would be dim, illuminated only by the faint glow of altar candles, casting long dancing shadows on the stone pillars. The chanting of the psalms would fill the air, a repetitive, soothing melody that drew the mind into a contemplative state, a quiet start to a day defined by prayer and discipline. This was not a hurried ritual, but a slow, deliberate act of devotion, marking the unhurried passage of time after matins and perhaps another service called Lauds. The monks might return to their cells for a brief period of rest or move directly to the heart of their intellectual life, the scriptorium. This was not a warm, cozy library filled with cushioned chairs. Imagine a large, often unheated room, designed for maximum light, perhaps with many windows facing north to ensure consistent indirect illumination, crucial for delicate work. The cold would penetrate your bones, making your fingers stiff, especially in winter. To combat this, scribes might wear fingerless gloves or huddle over a tiny brazier, its warmth offering only minimal relief. The only sound would be the almost imperceptible scratching of many quills on parchment, a rhythmic, gentle whisper that filled the silence. Your task as a scribe would be painstakingly slow and repetitive. You would be copying texts by hand, not just religious works, but ancient Greek and Roman classics, medical treatises, historical chronicles, and philosophical texts. Each letter had to be carefully formed, each word meticulously transcribed. Mistakes were costly, as parchment was a precious commodity made from animal skins and laboriously prepared. Imagine the sheer concentration required, hour after hour, hunched over a heavy wooden desk, your back aching, your eyes straining in the dim light. The ink, made from soot or iron gall, had to be constantly replenished, and quills, often made from goose feathers, needed frequent sharpening with a small knife. This was a silent, unglamorous form of intellectual heroism, a quiet dedication that, unbeknownst to the monks, was preserving the very foundations of Western thought for future generations. The simple act of copying, often seen as mundane, was in fact the quiet salvation of knowledge in a turbulent age. Let us now deepen our understanding of monastic life, moving beyond the scriptorium to explore the broader rhythms of their day, the meticulous management of their estates, and the quiet, often unacknowledged innovations that bloomed within their secluded walls. Imagine the monk, after hours spent hunched over parchment, stepping out into the cloister garth, the square garden at the heart of the monastery. This wasn't merely a decorative space, it was often a source of medicinal herbs and culinary ingredients tended with quiet dedication. The air would be filled with the scent of damp earth, growing plants, and the distant murmur of monastic life. The monk's day was rigidly structured by the canonical hours, a series of prayer services spaced throughout the day and night. After matins and lauds, there would be prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and finally, compline before bed. Each service involved chanting psalms, reading scripture, and periods of quiet contemplation. Imagine the profound sense of rhythm this schedule instilled, a slow, deliberate cadence that governed every waking moment. There was little room for spontaneity, but in its place, a comforting predictability, a sense of timeless purpose. Even meals, taken in the refectory, were often silent affairs, accompanied by a reading from a religious text, fostering a reflective atmosphere rather than boisterous conversation. Beyond their spiritual and scholarly pursuits, monasteries were often significant economic entities. They managed vast estates, including farmland, forests, and sometimes even mills or fisheries. The monks were, in essence, agriculturalists and administrators. They would oversee the growing of crops, wheat for bread, barley for ale, various vegetables and legumes. They would manage livestock, sheep for wool and meat, cattle for milk and labor. Imagine the quiet procession of monks and lay brothers heading out to the fields, their habits perhaps hitched up to avoid the mud, their hands working the soil with the same dedication they applied to their prayers. They were deeply connected to the land, understanding the subtle cycles of nature, the nuances of soil, and the vagaries of weather. This practical engagement with the earth provided sustenance not only for the monastic community, but also for the poor and travelers who sought refuge or charity at the abbey gates. Furthermore, monasteries were often centers of quiet technological innovation. They experimented with improved farming techniques, refined methods of brewing and winemaking, and developed complex water management systems to power mills or provide fresh water. While not heralded in the same way as military victories, these incremental advancements slowly but surely contributed to broader societal progress. Imagine the meticulous planning involved in diverting a stream to power a new mill wheel, or the careful selection of seeds to improve a future harvest. These were not grand scientific experiments, but pragmatic solutions born of necessity and a desire for greater efficiency, all carried out with a quiet, persistent determination. The monastic life, therefore, was a delicate balance of spiritual devotion, intellectual labor, and practical hands-on work. It was a world where silence was often the most profound sound, where diligence was a virtue, and where the preservation of knowledge and the quiet advancement of everyday life went hand in hand. The monks, these silent scribes and diligent stewards, created havens of stability and learning in an often turbulent age, their quiet contributions echoing through the centuries. One might softly wonder, as the monastic bells told their gentle rhythm, about the profound impact of such dedicated, unassuming lives. Let's now softly illuminate the inner world of the medieval monk, exploring the challenges to their spiritual discipline, the unexpected solace found in their routines, and the eventual decline of their paramount role in knowledge preservation. Despite the outward appearance of unwavering piety, the monastic life was not without its internal struggles. Imagine the monk, alone in his cold cell, battling not external enemies, but the subtle whispers of doubt, temptation, and boredom. The relentless routine, while providing structure, could also become monotonous. The long hours of prayer and contemplation could be interrupted by wandering thoughts, memories of the secular world left behind, or even the simple pangs of hunger during fasting periods. This inner spiritual warfare was a constant, personal battle, far removed from the dramatic clashes of a night's external world. The vow of silence, observed for much of the day in many orders, was both a discipline and a potential burden. While intended to foster contemplation and reduce distractions, it could also lead to feelings of isolation. Communication was often limited to signs or necessary whispers. Imagine the quiet frustration of not being able to speak freely, to share a thought, or to simply engage in casual conversation. Yet, this very silence could also be a source of profound peace, allowing for a deeper connection with one's inner self and with the divine, a space free from the constant clamor of the external world. The rhythmic sounds of the monastery, the bells, the chanting, the scratching of quills, the rustle of habits became a soothing soundscape, a gentle, predictable hum that filled the quiet. Despite the austerity, moments of quiet beauty and simple pleasure would punctuate the monastic Day. The illumination of a manuscript, meticulously decorating the initial letters with vibrant colors and gold leaf, could be a deeply satisfying creative outlet. Imagine the monk, his brush delicate and steady, bringing a page to life with intricate artistry. The cultivation of the monastic garden, growing herbs for medicine or vegetables for the refectory, offered a connection to the earth and the satisfaction of nurturing life. The quiet enjoyment of a shared meal, even a simple one, in the company of brothers, could be a moment of peaceful community. These small, unobtrusive joys provided a gentle counterpoint to the rigors of their vows. However, as the centuries turned, the monastery's role as the sole preserver of knowledge began to wane. The rise of universities in the 12th and 13th centuries slowly shifted the center of learning from the cloister to the bustling cities. Scholars outside the monastic walls began to engage with texts in new ways, fostering debate and intellectual inquiry that was sometimes at odds with the contemplative, conservative nature of monastic life. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century delivered the final, decisive blow to the scriptorium's monopoly on knowledge. Suddenly, books could be produced in vast numbers, cheaply and quickly, making the painstaking hand-copying of manuscripts increasingly obsolete. Imagine the quiet, almost imperceptible sadness as the rhythmic scratching of quills in the scriptorium gradually faded, replaced by the clatter and hum of a new, more efficient world. The medieval monk, then, was a quiet hero of an age, often living a life of profound physical discomfort and rigorous spiritual discipline, yet contributing immeasurably to the continuity of civilization. Their silent dedication in cold scriptoriums ensured that the wisdom of the past was not lost. Their disciplined lives maintained havens of order in a chaotic world, and their quiet innovations slowly propelled society forward. As the echoes of their chants fade into the distant past, we are left with the gentle, profound legacy of those who chose a life of quiet devotion, forever shaping the tapestry of human knowledge and experience. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 6. Water, wells, and woes. Hygiene in the European Middle Ages. Good evening, quiet traveler. We've journeyed through the lives of knights and ladies, explored the perils of medieval dining, and even delved into the quiet world of scribes. Now, let's turn our gaze to a topic often overlooked in romanticized visions of the past, yet profoundly central to daily life: medieval hygiene. Forget the sparkling cleanliness of modern bathrooms. In the Middle Ages, cleanliness was a constant, often losing, battle against dirt, disease, and deeply ingrained cultural practices. Settle deeper into your comfort, letting the quiet hum of history draw you into a world where a simple bath was a rare luxury, and cleanliness was far from godliness. Imagine, if you will, waking in a typical medieval home, whether a humble cottage or a grand castle. The concept of a daily shower or even a quick wash at a sink with running water simply didn't exist. Water had to be fetched, often from a well, a nearby stream, or a communal pump. This was a labor-intensive task, performed by servants in larger households, or by the family members themselves in smaller ones. Imagine the effort of hauling heavy buckets of water, perhaps multiple trips in the biting cold of winter or the oppressive heat of summer. This fundamental logistical challenge immediately limited the amount of water available for personal washing. For most people, a bath was a rare event, perhaps once a month, or even less frequently, depending on the season and social status. When a bath was taken, it was often in a large wooden tub filled with water heated over a fire and then carefully transported to a private chamber. This was a significant undertaking, requiring fuel, labor, and time. Imagine soaking in water that rapidly cooled, perhaps shared with other family members, with no concept of soap as we know it. Instead, people might use lye, a harsh alkaline solution from wood ash, or simply rub their skin with rough cloths. The notion of a refreshing, cleansing soak was far from the reality. It was often a utilitarian effort to remove visible grime. Beyond full body washing, daily cleanliness was focused on superficial efforts. Hands might be rinsed before meals, particularly among the wealthier, but thorough scrubbing was uncommon. Faces might be wiped with a damp cloth, but the deep cleansing we associate with modern hygiene was absent. The persistent smell of unwashed bodies was simply a fact of life, masked somewhat by perfumes among the elite, or by the ubiquitous odors of wood smoke, animals, and food in the general population. Imagine living in close quarters, always aware of the subtle, inescapable sense of human presence, intensified by a lack of regular washing. Even the concept of laundry was vastly different. Clothing, primarily made of wool or linen, was not washed daily. Outer garments were often brushed or aired out. Undergarments, closer to the skin, would be washed more frequently, but again, this involved laborious processes of boiling in lye and water, then beating the clothes to remove dirt. Imagine the sheer effort required to wash a week's worth of heavy woolen tunics and rough linen shirts, often in communal washing areas by a river or large tubs. The clean clothes, once dry, might still carry a faint, lingering odor, a testament to the challenges of true cleanliness in an age without detergents or abundant water. This foundational struggle with basic water access and limited understanding of germ theory truly shaped the daily experience of medieval individuals, making their world, in many ways, an endlessly unclean one. Let's now turn our attention to the specific challenges of waste management and the persistent presence of unpleasant odors that permeated medieval life, making true hygiene an almost unattainable ideal. Imagine, if you will, the privy or latrine in a medieval castle. These were often simple shafts built into the thickness of the castle walls, emptying either directly into the moat, a cesspit, or sometimes just down the side of the castle wall. The smell, especially in warmer months, would have been intense and pervasive, a constant backdrop to daily life. For the common folk, going to the necessary would involve using communal pits or simply finding a discreet spot outdoors. Concept of sewage systems as we know them was centuries away, and the accumulation of human and animal waste was a significant problem, particularly in densely populated towns and cities. Animals were everywhere in medieval society: horses, cattle, pigs, chickens, and dogs. With them came animal waste, contributing significantly to the pervasive odors and unhygienic conditions. Streets, even in towns, would often be covered in muck, a mixture of mud, animal droppings, and discarded refuse. Imagine walking through such conditions, your shoes sinking into the mire, the smells assaulting your senses. There was little organized waste collection. Refuse was often simply tossed into the street or onto a midden heap outside the home, attracting vermin and decaying slowly, adding to the general miasma. The very air within homes and castles carried a multitude of scents, often unpleasing to modern sensibilities. The constant smell of wood smoke from open fires, while providing warmth, also filled rooms with soot and a lingering, acrid odor. The aromas of poorly preserved food, unwashed bodies, and animal presence would combine to create a distinct, heavy atmosphere. Perfumes, often made from strong, floral or musky scents, were used by the wealthy not just for vanity, but to mask these underlying, less pleasant smells. Imagine wearing a delicate silk dress, only for the subtle aroma of stale air and body odor to cling to it. Despite your best efforts, even in moments of communal gathering, such as a feast in the Great Hall, the underlying hygienic realities would be apparent. While the food might be rich and plentiful, the lack of washing facilities for hands, the presence of dogs under the table gnawing on discarded bones, and the overall close proximity of many unwashed bodies would contribute to an environment far from pristine. Spittoons were common, and the remnants of meals often ended up on the floor. Imagine the gentle buzz of flies drawn by the aromas, and the general clamor interspersed with less savory realities. The pervasive lack of true sanitation meant that medieval life was, for all its grand narratives, lived in a constant state of low-level discomfort from dirt and odor. It was a world where smells were much more distinct and unavoidable, a daily testament to the challenges of maintaining cleanliness without the benefits of modern plumbing, sanitation, and germ theory. One might softly reflect on the quiet, persistent battle against the unseen forces of grime and decay, a battle rarely won, but always fought. Let's now softly contemplate the medieval understanding of health and disease in relation to their limited hygienic practices, and the profound impact this had on daily life and the pervasive presence of illness. It's crucial to understand that medieval people did not comprehend the concept of germs or microscopic pathogens. Illness was often attributed to imbalances of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, divine punishment for sins, or malevolent supernatural forces. Imagine a physician, clad in his long robes, examining a patient not for signs of infection, but for an excess of choleric yellow bile, believing that a bloodletting might restore balance. This fundamental lack of scientific understanding meant that even their best efforts at treatment were often ineffective or, worse, harmful. The pervasive presence of fleas, lice, and other parasites was not merely an annoyance, but a significant factor in disease transmission. These tiny creatures were vectors for various ailments, most notably the bubonic plague. While people might have understood that rats were somehow connected to disease, the intricate role of the flea as an intermediary was entirely unknown. Imagine the constant itching, the discomfort of living with these unseen companions, and the tragic irony that these seemingly minor irritations were often the silent harbingers of devastating epidemics. Personal grooming, such as combing hair and picking lice, was a routine, if unpleasant, activity, a quiet acknowledgement of the constant battle against these tiny invaders. Even the rituals around death and burial reflected the prevailing hygienic realities. The bodies were often prepared with simple wrappings and burials, particularly during times of plague or mass casualties, were often hasty affairs in communal pits. The rapid spread of disease within crowded communities, particularly those lacking clean water and adequate sanitation, meant that illness could quickly become an unstoppable force. Imagine the quiet fear that would grip a village or town when the sweating sickness or the Black Death arrived, knowing there was little, if anything, that could truly be done to stop its relentless march. Ultimately, the medieval approach to hygiene was one born of necessity, limited resources, and a lack of scientific understanding. It was a world where cleanliness was more about visible tidiness than invisible sterility, and where the constant presence of dirt, waste, and disease was an inescapable aspect of daily existence. The struggle for health was a quiet, perpetual battle against unseen enemies, fought with rudimentary tools and a profoundly different understanding of the human body and its environment. One might softly wonder, as the echoes of medieval life fade, about the simple luxury of clean running water and the profound impact it has had on our own comfort and well-being. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 7. The Silk Road's gentle echoes. Daily life in a Sogdian caravanserai. Good evening, quiet traveller. We've journeyed through the muddy realities of medieval Europe, from the knight's burdens to the lady's duties and the challenges of medieval hygiene. Now, let us embark on a far more distant and exotic journey, a slow drift across the vast, ancient heartland of Asia. Along the legendary Silk Road, forget the bustling marketplaces and adventurous caravans for a moment. We will settle into the quiet rhythms of a Sogdian caravanserai, a vital oasis of rest and trade, where weary travelers and their animals found refuge amidst the stark beauty of the Central Asian steppes. Dim your lights, feel the subtle pull of distant lands, and imagine the soft murmur of foreign tongues under a canopy of countless stars. Imagine arriving at a caravanserai at dusk, after days or even weeks of traveling across vast, often monotonous landscapes, endless deserts, barren mountains, or stretches of dusty plains. The sight of its sturdy, high walls, often built of sun-dried mud bricks, would have been a profoundly welcoming sight. These weren't opulent palaces, but fortified way stations designed for practicality and security. The air around it might carry the scent of dung smoke from cooking fires, the faint sweet smell of dates, and the dry, earthy aroma of the desert. The first sound you might hear would be the low murmur of voices, the braying of camels, and the gentle creak of wagon wheels. Upon entering, you would pass through a massive, often single, guarded gate, designed to be easily secured against bandits. You would find yourself in a large, central courtyard, often open to the sky. This was the heart of the caravanserai, a bustling, yet somehow orderly, space. Here, the animals would be unloaded, camels kneeling with quiet sighs, horses shaking their manes, donkeys laden with heavy packs. Imagine the rustle of straw as fresh bedding was laid out for the animals, the soft thud of bales of goods being lowered to the ground. The air would be filled with the subtle aroma of animal sweat, dry feed, and perhaps the exotic scent of spices that had traveled thousands of miles. Around the perimeter of this courtyard were the individual stalls, or small rooms for the merchants, travelers, and their guards. These were simple, unadorned spaces, often little more than bare mud brick walls and a packed earth floor. There would be no elaborate furniture, perhaps just a few mats for sleeping and a small brazier for warmth in the cold desert nights. Privacy, as in many medieval settings, was minimal. The sounds of your neighbors, the soft conversations, the occasional snore would filter through the thin walls. Imagine unrolling your own sleeping mat, carefully placing your small bundle of possessions beside you, and feeling the quiet weariness settle deep into your bones after a long day's journey, your first priority, after securing your animals and goods, would be water. Caravanserais were built around reliable water sources, deep wells, underground canots, or channels diverting streams. This water, though often brackish, was life itself in the arid regions of Central Asia. Imagine the preciousness of each. ladleful not just for drinking, but for watering your thirsty animals, for a quick rinse of dust from your face and hands, or for cooking a simple meal over a small fire. This basic fundamental need governed much of the daily rhythm, a constant reminder of the desert's unforgiving nature and the caravanserai's vital role as a haven. The simple act of finding water was a quiet blessing, a testament to the life-sustaining purpose of these ancient way stations. Let's continue our quiet journey into the heart of the caravanserai, exploring the delicate dance of trade, communication, and the subtle cultural exchanges that unfolded within its sturdy walls. Imagine the central courtyard bustling with activity as the sun climbed higher, merchants hailing from distant lands. Perhaps a Sogdian from Samarkand, a Persian from Nishapur, a Chinese trader from Dunhuang, or an Indian from Multan, would begin the slow, deliberate process of unloading their goods. Bales of silk, bundles of spices, sacks of precious gems, rolls of fine cloth, and even crates of exotic fruits or porcelain would be carefully brought out. The air might become tinged with the aroma of cumin, cinnamon, and the delicate scent of silk. Trade negotiations were often unhurried affairs, conducted over cups of warm tea, a gesture of hospitality that transcended language barriers. There were no flashing screens or rapid-fire transactions. Instead, there would be quiet conversation, subtle haggling, and a profound reliance on trust built over repeated journeys. Imagine the intricate process of bartering, where goods might be exchanged directly, or coins from various empires carefully weighed and assessed for their purity. The caravanserai was a melting pot of languages and customs and gestures, facial expressions, and rudimentary shared words often bridged the linguistic divide. It was a slow, deliberate exchange, reflecting the vast distances and preciousness of the goods involved. Beyond the formal trade, the caravanserai served as a vital hub for information and news. Travelers, arriving from different directions, carried with them whispers of distant events, the rise and fall of empires, the fortunes of rival merchants, the spread of new religions, or the shifting tides of political power. Imagine the quiet gathering around a flickering fire at night, as travelers shared stories and rumors, piecing together a larger mosaic of the world beyond their immediate horizons. These were the ancient world's newspapers, delivered not by print, but by word of mouth, shaping perceptions and influencing future journeys. Even the simple act of preparing a meal would be a quiet cultural exchange, while many travelers would prepare their own food, relying on dried provisions. There might be communal fires where a merchant from the West might observe the preparation of a noodle dish by an Eastern counterpart, or share a piece of dried fruit from their homeland. Imagine the subtle curiosity, the quiet observation of different cooking techniques, the sharing of a simple meal under the vast desert sky. These seemingly minor interactions slowly wove a tapestry of shared understanding, softening the edges of cultural differences. The caravanserai, therefore, was far more than just a place to rest. It was a crucible of commerce and culture, a silent testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient world. In its quiet courtyards, goods, ideas, and stories flowed, shaping the destinies of individuals and empires, all facilitated by the simple, vital promise of shelter and water along a long and arduous road. One might softly wonder, as the night winds gently whisper through the caravanserai walls, about the countless lives and stories that briefly intersected within its embrace. Let's now gently settle into the quiet moments of rest and reflection within the caravanserai, and contemplate the subtle dangers and simple comforts that punctuated a traveler's time there. After the bustling trade of the day, as dusk descended, the caravanserai would take on a different, more subdued atmosphere. Fires would glow in the central courtyard, casting flickering shadows on the high walls. The air, cooled by the desert night, might carry the gentle scent of a shared meal, perhaps dried meat rehydrated in a pottage, or unleavened bread baked over hot coals. Imagine the soft crackle of the flames, the occasional grunt of a resting camel, and the low, hushed tones of conversations winding down. Sleep in a caravanserai was rarely truly private or entirely comfortable. Travelers would unroll their mats or blankets in their small, often shared, chambers, or even directly in the courtyard under the open sky if the weather allowed and space was limited. The sounds of the caravanserai would become a nocturnal lullaby. The soft breathing of many people, the shifting of animals, the distant call of a desert creature, or the quiet pacing of a guard. There were no plush mattresses or insulated rooms. The ground would be hard, and the temperature could drop significantly in the desert night, making a warm cloak or blanket a precious possession. Imagine drawing your covers tighter, seeking warmth, and finding a fragile peace in the shared vulnerability of the travelers around you, despite the security offered by the caravanserai walls. A subtle undercurrent of vulnerability always remained. Bandits, though often deterred by the fortified nature of these outposts, were a constant threat on the road. Even within the caravanserai, vigilance was necessary. Goods, even secured, were valuable, and the company was diverse. Trust was built slowly, if at all. Imagine the quiet click of a knife being sharpened, or the subtle glint of a weapon tucked close at hand, even during moments of rest. The very security of the caravanserai reinforced the dangers of the world outside its walls. Yet, within these humble walls, there were also moments of profound solace and simple connection. The shared journey created a bond among travelers, even if fleeting. A shared meal, a comforting story, or a quiet moment of camaraderie offered a respite from the loneliness of the long road. Imagine sharing a cup of hot tea with a fellow traveler, a gesture of quiet hospitality that spoke volumes without words. For many, the caravanserai was not just a waypoint, but a temporary community, a small island of humanity in a vast and often unforgiving landscape. The Sogdian caravanserai, therefore, was a microcosm of the Silk Road itself, a place of arduous travel and precious exchange, of quiet human connection and ever-present danger. Its mud-brick walls held countless stories of resilience, trade, and the quiet determination to traverse immense distances. As the last embers of our imaginative journey in the caravanserai gently fade, we are left with the profound sense of these ancient resting places, vital arteries of connection in a world so vastly different from our own, yet bound by the universal human need for shelter, sustenance, and the quiet promise of tomorrow's journey. Asterisk, let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 8, Whispers from the Savannah. Ancient mollies, gold and common, clay. Good evening, gentle listener. We have journeyed through the fortified caravanserai of the Silk Road. Now, let us embark on a different kind of historical journey, far from the familiar landscapes of Europe and the arid paths of Central Asia. Let us drift to the sun-drenched savannas of West Africa, to the heartland of the ancient Mali Empire, a realm famed for its immense wealth in gold, yet built upon the quiet, persistent labor of its people and the often overlooked rhythms of daily life. Dim your lights, settle deeper into your comfort, and imagine the warm, dusty air carrying the distant sound of drums and the rustle of tall grasses. Imagine waking in a small, circular mud brick home, perhaps in a village nestled near the banks of the mighty Niger River. The walls, built from sun-dried earth, would radiate a gentle coolness from the night, a welcome respite from the coming day's heat. Your bed would likely be a simple mat laid on the packed earth floor, perhaps covered with a woven cloth. As the first light painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, the village would begin to stir, not with hurried urgency, but with a slow, deliberate awakening. The first sounds would be the soft clatter of cooking pots, the gentle bleating of goats, and the quiet murmurs of family members greeting the new day. Your first task, especially for the women and children, might be to fetch water. In many villages, this meant a walk to the communal well, often a deep shaft dug into the earth, or to the nearest river or stream. Imagine carrying a large clay pot, perhaps balanced on your head, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on your skin as you made your way along a well-trodden path. The water, though vital, might not be crystal clear, carrying the fine silt of the river or the earthy taste of the well. Each drop was precious, used sparingly for cooking, drinking, and the most basic The morning routine was one of quiet necessity, a gentle choreography of gathering life's fundamental resources. As the sun climbed higher, the focus would shift to food preparation. The staple diet would revolve around millet, sorghum, or rice, depending on the region's climate and access to water. Imagine the rhythmic sound of a pestle pounding grain in a large wooden mortar, transforming it into flour for porridge or a thick dough. Vegetables, such as okra, yams, or leafy greens, might be harvested from nearby plots, adding flavor and sustenance. Meat, usually goat, chicken, or wild game, would be a less frequent luxury, perhaps reserved for special occasions or after a successful hunt. The cooking fire, built outdoors or in a small, separate cooking hut, would fill the air, with the earthy scent of wood smoke and simmering stews. This was not a hurried process, but a patient, communal effort, often with women gathering to share the labor and conversation, their voices a soft, steady hum against the backdrop of the awakening village. The simplicity of these daily tasks belied their profound importance, shaping the very rhythm of life in ancient Mali. Let's gently delve deeper into the daily life of ancient Mali, moving beyond the immediate household tasks to explore the vital roles of agriculture, craft, and community. Imagine the rhythm of the day shifting as the sun climbed higher, drawing people out to the surrounding fields. For many, particularly men, the primary work was in the fields, cultivating the staple crops of millet, sorghum, or rice. The tools would be simple: hoes with long wooden handles and metal blades, or perhaps digging sticks. This was backbreaking work under the hot African sun, requiring endurance and a deep understanding of the land and its seasons. Imagine the slow, repetitive motion of hoeing, breaking up the earth, or the careful planting of seeds, each gesture a quiet conversation with the soil. The success of the harvest was paramount, determining the well-being and survival of the entire community. Beyond the fields, many in the village would be engaged in various crafts, transforming raw materials from their environment into essential goods. Pottery was fundamental. Women, often with remarkable skill, would shape clay dug from riverbanks into sturdy pots for cooking, storing water, and preserving grain. Imagine the supple feel of the wet clay under their hands, slowly rising into elegant forms then left to dry in the sun before being fired in communal kilns. The subtle earthy scent of damp clay would hang in the air near the potters' huts. Weaving was another crucial craft. Cotton, grown in fields, or wild fibers, would be spun into thread and then woven on simple looms into cloth for clothing, blankets, and mats. Imagine the rhythmic click-clack of the loom, the steady motion of hands passing shuttle through warp, slowly creating intricate patterns from dyed threads. The soft feel of homespun cotton, though perhaps coarser than modern fabrics, would be a testament to hours of diligent work. For men, ironworking was a highly respected and often spiritual craft. Blacksmiths would transform iron ore, extracted from local mines, into tools for farming, weapons, and even decorative items. Imagine the clang of hammer on anvil, the roar of the bellows, and the flickering light of the forge as raw metal was painstakingly shaped through fire and force. These crafts were not hobbies. They were the very foundation of the Malayan economy, providing necessary goods and opportunities for trade. The concept of community was deeply ingrained in ancient Malian society. Labor was often communal, with villagers helping each other with planting and harvesting, or with the construction of homes. Decisions were often made by consensus, with elders playing a crucial role in guiding the community. Imagine the communal spirit, the shared laughter, and the quiet solidarity as tasks were accomplished together. Evenings might bring storytelling. Around a central fire, the recounting of ancient myths and legends, or the rhythmic beat of drums and the gentle melodies of stringed instruments, fostering a sense of shared identity and belonging. These were the gentle echoes of a rich cultural tapestry woven with threads of daily labor, artistic skill, and deep communal bonds. Let's now gently conclude our exploration of ancient Mali by considering the subtle yet profound influence of trade and spirituality on daily life, and the quiet dignity that permeated a society famed for its wealth. While we often hear of Mali's immense gold riches, the daily lives of most people were not lived in opulent luxury. Instead, the gold flowed primarily through the hands of the ruling elite and the powerful merchants. Yet, the presence of this valuable commodity shaped the broader economy. Imagine the quiet procession of merchants, perhaps from the powerful Wangara trading networks, passing through the villages, their donkeys laden with goods from distant lands, salt from the Sahara, copper, even cowrie shells that served as a form of currency. These were not always direct exchanges. Often, local goods like agricultural produce or crafts would be bartered for items from far away, connecting even the most remote village to a vast economic web. The arrival of a caravan would be a subtle ripple of excitement, a connection to the larger world. Spirituality was deeply interwoven with every aspect of daily life, offering both guidance and solace, while Islam grew in prominence, particularly in the urban centers and among the ruling classes after the 11th century. Many traditional African beliefs coexisted and continued to shape the rhythms of the villagers. Imagine the quiet reverence for ancestors, the belief in nature spirits, and the rituals performed to ensure a good harvest or protect the community from harm. These weren't grand public spectacles every day, but subtle acts of devotion, a small offering left at a sacred tree, a quiet prayer whispered before planting, or the respectful observance of taboos. The griot, a storyteller, musician, and historian, played a vital role in preserving oral traditions, recounting epic tales of heroes and ancestors, connecting the present generation to the deep past. Imagine sitting around a fire at night, the air filled with the gentle strumming of a kora or the rhythmic beat of a drum, as the griot's voice wove intricate narratives that taught lessons, reinforced values, and brought history to life. Life in ancient Mali, then, was characterized by a profound connection to the land, a strong sense of community, and a spiritual worldview that imbued daily actions with deeper meaning. Despite the vast wealth flowing through the empire, the average person's existence was one of diligent labor, resourcefulness, and a quiet resilience in the face of the elements. It was a life lived in rhythm with the seasons, guided by tradition, and enriched by the subtle beauty of communal bonds and enduring beliefs, as the quiet whispers from the savannah gently fade into the distance. We are left with a deeper appreciation for the rich and often understated humanity that thrived in this ancient African realm.